All right. Well, on behalf of the Association for the Study of Higher Education, also known as ASHE, it's my pleasure to welcome you to today's session, Strategies for Submitting an ASHE Proposal for International Research. We have some amazing volunteers who've put together a wonderful program for you today to share their insight, expertise, and information regarding the upcoming deadline for the call for proposals for the annual conference. I will be your support person for the session. My name is Alicia Castillo-Shrestha. I use she, her pronouns, and I will be available for any technical support that you might need during the session. Feel free to send me a direct message or use the chat. You can also access closed captions for the session on the bottom of your Zoom screen. And if you need any help with that, you can let me know. But it's my pleasure to turn it over to our wonderful facilitators for today. And I will let Dr. Ku take it from here. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Alicia. Hello, everyone. Happy Monday and happy April. Today's April 1st day already. So thank you for joining us today for ASHE Council on International Higher Education webinar on strategies for submitting an ASHE proposal for international research. So on behalf of CIHE team, I would like to thank ASHE office and Alicia for hosting and supporting today's webinar. And thanks to speakers who are co-chairs of ASHE 2024, CIHE Pre-Con, and International Higher Education section of General Conference. And thanks to the audience who took the time to be here today. So before we get into the conversation about the proposal quickly, there are a few information that I want to cover. So related to our mission of supporting and fostering learning through the generation and sharing of knowledge, ASHE acknowledges the painful history of genocide in the United States for Native, Aboriginal, and Indigenous people. We honor and respect the many and diverse tribal nations and peoples who were forcibly removed from, as well as those still connected to this land. So before we get into the real party, I just want to talk about briefly what's CIHE, what's the Council on International Higher Education. So CIHE is one of the councils under the ASHE community, and we are to provide a forum for the dissemination and discussion of research in order to advance research and theory on higher education from comparative and international perspectives. And this is our executive board members of the CIHE community. And speaking of the executive committee members, so we have 3 vacancies for our next term. So I'd like to highlight. So we welcome you to consider nomination yourself. So we have 3 vacancies: the graduate representatives, communication leader, and the 1 spot for members at large. If you are interested in considering for the nomination, please contact our nomination chair, Tina, and her information is right here. And it will be so lovely to work with you. Again, this is also our call for joining to our community, CIHE. If you join our community and sign up as CIHE member, there are some benefits, not just for the ASHE Pre-Con registration discount, but also you will receive our biweekly newsletters, networking and social events, different webinars, including today's webinar, and you'll be also connected to our international education communities. Speaking of the networking and social events and webinars, I'd like to highlight our upcoming events in April. So this coming Thursday, April 4th, we have CIHE and Networking Roundtable, and you will be able to see diverse scholars on international research topic. This is coming this Thursday. There's a QR code in the screen, so if you scan the QR code, it will directly link to the further information. We have another webinar the 3rd week of April, so April 16th, we'll do the CIHE Research Article Award winners talk on their article. And we have a proposal deadline for our ASHE 2024 convention, which we're going to talk about in a minute. So these are some upcoming events. So please take your calendar and mark on your calendar. So without further ado, this is our today's agenda. And I am happy to introduce the speakers. I forgot to introduce myself. So I'm Katie. I am the vice chair for the CIHE community. I am an associate professor in student affairs program at the University of Georgia, and I use she and her as my pronouns. And Dr. Mitic and Dr. Castiello will introduce themselves.
Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Radomir Mitic. I use he, him pronouns. I'm currently an assistant professor of higher education at the University of North Dakota. And along with my colleague, Crystal George Mwangi, we are the co-chairs for the International Higher Education section, which is part of the General Conference. And we'll talk a little bit about the differences there.
Thank you, Andrew. Hello, everyone. My name is Santiago Castiello, and I'm an assistant professor of higher education at Seton Hall University in New Jersey, in the United States. And along with my dear friend and good colleague, Dr. Katie Koo, I'm co-chair of this year's CIHE pre-conference, which is going to happen one day before the general conference starts in November in Minneapolis. And again, we'll talk a little bit more about the difference between both of those options for you to present during the ASHE conference.
Thank you, speakers, and thank you for taking the time to be here to support the community. Like Dr. Mitic mentioned, Dr. Crystal George Mwangi, she is also the co-chair of the International Higher Education section. Unfortunately, she's not here today, but Dr. Mitic will do the 10 times person roles for on behalf of her. All right. So if we are ready, Dr. Castiello will talk about the overview of the ASHE proposal submission in this slide.
Thank you so much. Again, thanks for the invitation, and it's a pleasure to be here to talk a little bit more about what does it mean to submit a proposal for a conference like ASHE, and a little bit about the conference itself and the topic or the theme. So this year, the conference has a really interesting topic or theme, which is called I Am a Scholar. And if you go into the website and look at the conference website, you can find the full call for proposals, and there you will find at the very beginning, what does it mean for this specific topic? Why was it chosen by our current president? And I think what's really interesting about this topic is that it's really an invitation about considering or reconsidering what do we mean by scholars and who are scholars within higher education. Because sometimes I think mostly in the past, like we would think about scholars, as those folks who might be probably like ourselves, teaching or already, earned a doctorate and being professors at a university, producing some research. But that's honestly a very narrow, I think, conception of what a scholar means. So this year, we want to go as an ASHE community to dig deeper into what does it mean, who is a scholar, and how everyone within our ASHE community, students, faculty, practitioners, staff members, like everyone within the ASHE community is a scholar, because we live and practice and read about and do research on higher education, broadly speaking. In our case, I'm sure that most of us are interested as well within higher education in the international component of higher education. So that's the topic for this year. And a little bit later, we'll talk a little bit more about whether or not and how, to what extent should we align some of our proposals with the topic. But know that every year, ASHE chooses a theme or a topic for the conference, which is going to be kind of like highlighted throughout the conference, especially throughout the presidential sessions, the keynote presentations, but not necessarily in every single presentation. So again, I'll talk more about that later, but you don't necessarily have to prepare a presentation that is specifically about what it means being a scholar. And again, in terms of submitting a proposal, there's a lot of opportunities to submit a proposal, and Dr. Mitic will talk a little bit after me and on the different types of submissions. But overall, it doesn't matter what type of submission you want to prepare. It doesn't matter whether you're thinking about submitting to CIHE or the International Higher Education track within the General Conference. The due date is the same one. It's April 22nd. And historically, there's not a lot of hopes for extending that deadline. So please plan accordingly. I know that some conferences sometimes, like as the deadline approaches, they extend it, for a week and a couple of weeks. I wouldn't count on that. So it's pretty much a very hard deadline. So plan accordingly. You still have like 3 or so weeks, right? And what happens between April 22nd and the conference, which is not happening until November? Well, you will have during May, mostly will convene and assign all of those proposals that you're submitting to other folks who will review them, right? So one of the key components of any academic conference, certainly ASHE as well, is the peer review process, right? It's not about you submitting a proposal that the people in this panel are going to just read and say like, oh, I like this proposal. Let's accept this proposal and it should be presented, right? We really rely on the input from our community. So reviewers will read all of the proposals and recommend whether or not they should be accepted or not for the conference. And that will happen during May. And then in early June, the program committee will meet. In this case, it's going to be virtual. We'll review all of the recommendations from the reviewers, and then the proposals that are deemed or recommended for acceptance will be put together in sessions, in panels, and then we'll inform the decisions in early July. So you will submit by the end of this month, and you will hear back in early July whether or not your proposal has been accepted. So it's important to keep those things in mind. And how does that review process work? Well, every proposal will have 3 reviewers. So we'll assign 3 different people to review those submissions. People will be asked to rate different components of the proposal on a scale from 1 to 5. Typically, and there's a little bit of leeway there, at 3.5 or above overall rate or grade is deemed good for being accepted. And the criteria might differ slightly depending on the type of submission. And again, we'll talk right after this slide about the different types of submission. But overall, what you can expect that people will be watching when they're reading your proposal is how significant it is, right? In itself, to the topic that you're studying and to the field of higher education, of international higher education overall. How strong your proposal is in terms of using theories, concepts, building a conceptual framework. Whether or not you're doing a good job in connecting the topic that you're studying with the relevant literature, right? How sound the study is, how rigorous the study seems to be designed, whether or not the design is appropriate to the types of questions that you are asking in your paper, in your proposal. Overall clarity, how is that the flow of the proposal, whether or not it makes sense. And qualifications, it has a slight star there because it depends on the type of proposal. So if you're proposing something like a symposium, like why are the people that are being recommended to be part of the symposium good people to talk about that topic? Like, what are the qualifications? What's their expertise to be able to discuss that specific topic in the format of a symposium? And we'll talk more about what a symposium means in a little bit. But again, overall, it's basically how the proposal's review work, the type of criteria, and again, the deadlines, which is something that you should really keep in mind. Again, you still have 3 more weeks, and we're hoping that all of you in this webinar right now, or whoever is going to be watching it later, will submit a proposal. I can tell you from experience, I started submitting my first proposal for ASHE during my first year of my doctorate degree back in 2016. And I think it's a really good opportunity, particularly for grad students, to start getting some really good feedback, regardless of the outcome of the proposal. The feedback that you will get from the reviewers in itself is very, very valuable. And hopefully your proposal will be accepted. So the opportunity to present that submission will be very, very valuable as well for you in your career, especially for students, but also anyone really, any early career scholars, as I was referring to earlier. I think that's what I have for now. And let's go to Dr. Mitic to talk a little bit more about the types of submissions.
Thank you, Dr. Castiello.
I get the fun discussion of the different proposal types. And before I get into the different types of proposal, I just want to talk about format real briefly about in-person versus virtual, because I don't think we've talked about that yet. For the CIHE pre-conference, these are all in-person presentations. For the International Higher Education general session, you do have the option of submitting a proposal for a virtual day, which will be on November 7th, for all of these categories except posters. Posters, they have them physically set up, so that has to be in person. So you'll have the opportunity to tick the box for which session type that you would want to do in case you're not able to join us physically in Minneapolis in November. And without further ado, I'll now go through the different types of proposals. And I'll start with the research paper first. This is perhaps our most popular and most volume in terms of submissions. These are empirical or data-based papers. These ones are, pretty far along that they will include at least some partial or preliminary findings. Sometimes they include full findings on them. And as Dr. Castiello just talked about, this idea of, having literature review, research plan, significance, and findings in there. So that's those are the hallmarks of the research papers that we see. And then if accepted, you would, provide a full paper a couple of weeks ahead of the conference and then prepare about a 12 to 15-minute presentation. We typically group 3 or 4 of these types of papers together. Sometimes we'll include also scholarly papers, which I'll talk about in a minute. And it comes up with about a 75-minute session, 3 or 4 papers, and a discussant will read those papers ahead of time, provide individual feedback, and also have a discussion about how these papers all kind of come together. As we kind of talk about, is that the theme is not a criterion for evaluation, but it's something that really helps kind of bring sessions together. Sometimes, we try to match papers, 3 or 4 that are very similar in topics. Sometimes we have really, really high scoring papers that we really want in the conference. Sometimes the topics might not align as well, but that's where the theme, can really help us discuss and kind of weave them all together. So, if you have a chance of kind of speaking to the theme a little bit, that can kind of help, bring that session together. And then these papers will typically have, sections about the objectives, the purposes of your inquiry, the philosophical, theoretical, or practical argument, a very brief literature review. We understand 2,000 words is not a lot of space to bring in a full literature review. Your methods, your research plan, your modes of inquiry. These can be qualitative, quantitative, mixed methods, what have you, as long as there's some empirical piece to it. Discuss briefly the data sources or evidence, your analytical plan, and then again, a brief overview of the findings, whether they're preliminary, partial, or full, and then end with the importance or significance to the study of higher education. Again, as Dr. Castiello talked about the review process, 3 reviewers, and we get the scores, and then we try to match them by topical area. The next type I want to highlight are the scholarly papers, and these ones are not empirically based, but they'll feature some novel argument. They'll grapple with some critical questions to the field. These can be theoretical papers, conceptual papers, something that synthesizes different types of literature. You're not really required to adhere to an empirical design with like methods, data collection, analysis, but we are looking for, very, very well designed papers. And I've seen some papers in this category come in as like the theoretical or conceptual framework that can guide a future study and a way to kind of present that in a novel fashion. Similar to the research papers, these ones are about 12 to 15-minute presentations if accepted. Scholarly papers do get paired up also with research papers once we're at the conference, 2,000 words, and they will be judged based on their objectives and purposes of the inquiry, the philosophical, theoretical, or practical argument and its bases, some literature and sources to support the argument or analysis being done, some emerging conclusions or propositions and implications of the argument, and of course, like all papers, the importance of the argument for the study of higher education. Okay. The next is probably one of the more fun proposals that we get is the interactive symposium. And like it says in its name, this will be something that's a little bit more interactive, typically involves a Q&A, a moderator. This is a session that, unlike the other ones, we do want to see the biographies of the individuals that would be part of the presentation, so that we can kind of see, what backgrounds, what kind of expertise and perspectives that the speakers bring. And typically this will be like 3 or 4 people with that moderator. They're not necessarily all research papers, but they can definitely discuss the research. But these can also be more conceptual in nature, or focus on theory, or just practical implications of a higher education issue. These ones are, another one is 2,000 words in terms of its length. And then the things that they'll be judged on is the objectives of the session. What are some like learning outcomes that are expected? This is intended to be a little bit more instructional, or more, I don't know. I don't want to say they're all learning based, but this is more to kind of, help the audience, grapple with issues. They'll also be judged on the backgrounds and expertise of the presenters, the philosophical, theoretical, and practical arguments being presented, the literature and the sources to support the argument or analysis, the emerging conclusions or propositions and implications of the argument, and also kind of the session format and structure. Is the moderator appropriate for this kind of discussion, and what are the strategies to facilitate audience discussion and learning? Because that sort of interactive, getting the audience as part of this is a very big part of the criteria for this one. And of course, the significance of the topic and the symposium, and kind of telling us why this topic deserves discussion, at this level in the field. The next are the self-designed paper session. And the way I like to describe this is you do all the work for us. You get the 3 to 4 papers together, you show the theme between them. These can all, these can be a combination of research and scholarly papers. You include this, the chair, the discussant. Again, you do all the work for us and really kind of put together a nice cadre of 3 or 4 presentations that are related to each other. And for these ones, you are essentially doing about 1,000 words to describe the session as a whole, and then there will be a little short, I think about 350-word abstracts of each individual paper there. And kind of like with the scholarly and the research papers, we want to see the objective and purposes, the philosophical, theoretical, and practical argument, the literature to support this, the emerging conclusions, and the significance of each of the papers to the study of higher ed, and then a very brief overview in each of those papers as well. And here we kind of expect either some sort of theoretical conceptual discussion or an overview of findings in them. Next up are the performance, visual, and digital scholarship, understanding that scholarship is not limited to words on a page and audio-visual presentation, that these can be performances, these could be documentaries, these can be performance ethnographies, art displays. We've really seen a rise in this in recent ASHE conferences with the rise of methods like photo voice and things like that. So these are really, really cool sessions that can be 12 to 15 minutes, like a traditional research paper, 75-minute total session. And for these ones, we are looking at similarly a 2,000-word proposal, objectives, the philosophical or theoretical basis, the literature, the description of the scholarship, as like, is it going to be an exhibition, a performance, a video, digital, the data sources, the analytical plan, the findings, importance, and significance. And we also ask that presenters provide a little bit of information on what logistical or technological needs that they would need. Would it be a podium and microphone, a certain size stage? And then there'll be some conversation between the ASHE office and accepted presenters to kind of see what are the minimum requirements, what are the ideal requirements for those. And Alicia would be able to answer questions on what our spaces allow in Minneapolis. Next, our works in progress. This is a kind of initiative the last couple of years through ASHE to move away from what we traditionally called our roundtable sessions. These are more about 20-minute presentations of very, very early work. You may not have results, or they may be in the most preliminary phases. And we kind of think about that 20 minutes to be split in half between a little bit more of a formal presentation, but also sort of a crowdsourcing or Q&A with the audience, where maybe the presenters ask a question or two of things that they're wrangling with as part of this study, and that the audience can kind of help with. I did one of these last year in Minneapolis, and I found it really helpful at the early stage of the process to get some peer feedback across. And these can be great for PowerPoint presentations, handouts, things of that nature, where you kind of focus on the project, its purpose, and questions for the audience engagement. These ones are a little bit shorter in terms of the requirements. It's 1,500 words. And it's basically all the same requirements as a traditional research paper, just without the findings section. So you've got your objectives, the philosophical or theoretical framework, the literature, the data sources, the analytical plan, and some of the importance to the field of higher education. And then lastly, we've got our posters. Posters, again, these are only for in-person presentations. These are, appropriate for any stage at the research. They're very popular with doctoral students. I'll note all of the other categories I just talked about are very popular with doctoral students. There's no sort of, these are for faculty and these are for doctoral students. It's open to everyone. And if you look at our programs from recent years, you'll notice that it's very heavy on both sides. But again, a lot of students in their in their first couple of years of their doctoral work will opt for poster sessions, since they don't have findings and things like that. And these are about 1,500 words. Again, the objectives, philosophical or theoretical, literature, the research plan, the study, the methods, the data sources, the analytical approach. If you've got findings, definitely include them. And then the importance or significance of higher education. And these ones will also be, where they're physically located in the conference site. And then, people will walk through, you can have some conversations as people are walking through the gallery for that. And it's a really, really awesome session. And that covers all the different types. Do you want me to address the question in the chat, since it's specifically on this? Okay. So Hannah's asking the question of, what is the difference between interactive symposium and self-designed paper sessions? From my understanding, the self-designed paper sessions are all like research or scholarly papers, where the interactive symposium is not so, it can be research-based, but this could be just kind of talking about the larger issues within higher education. The other thing is that while all sessions will have some interactive component, there's always going to be a question and answer session with a self-designed paper session. The interactive symposium centers, I think, the discussion a little bit more than the presentation aspects. I don't know if my colleagues have any other thoughts on that, but that's kind of how I see the difference between the two of them.
Dr. Mitic made a really great point about the differences between these two sessions. So, for interactive symposium is more about the discussion base, and it doesn't have to be a research or scholarly paper, but it's about any topic around the international higher education. So if there's some issue or question that you want to pose to the audience, and then from that post, you want to, create more discussion space and talk about that specific issue, I think that's a good fit for interactive symposium. You can imagine that this could be something panel discussion. You invite some panels on that expertise of specific topic, and then you have each panelist to talk about that topic. So it's not, it cannot be really research based, but it can be the research based. It can be something beyond just a scholarly part. It can be any topical discussions on this topic.
And I'll just highlight what Ray was saying at the beginning, which is very important to me. It's that the paper component. So in the self-designed paper session, even though you're pretty much creating the session yourself and you are convening a group of scholars to present there, it is expected that you will name a discussant, and that discussant will receive actual full-length papers review and discuss during the session. And in the interactive symposium, that might not be the case. Again, people will share from their perspective on that specific topic, on that specific issue, but there's not like a formal paper that has to be submitted and that someone has to review and discuss at the end of the session, which I think it's also the key difference.
Thank you. And I will hand it back.
Thank you so much. It looks like Alicia put a very important information about the session as well. So please refer to the chat that Alicia just posted. And thank you so much for your detailed and specific explanation about each section, Dr. Mitic. Now, in next slide, I will have Dr. Castiello again.
Thank you. Yeah, so now I would really like to encourage participation from everyone in the call and who's watching the video later, regardless of whether or not you submit a proposal. Even if you don't submit a proposal, or if you do submit one, we invite you to volunteer because there's other ways in which you can participate as part of the conference in different stages of the conference. So there are three main roles that we need for the conference to be successful, right? Well, there's four. One is obvious, which is the people who are going to present. So we need the people who are presenting, but we also need people to review proposals, to chair the sessions, and to discuss the papers on the sessions, right? So I'm going to talk briefly about those three different roles. And again, you can sign up to be a volunteer in each of these roles that I'm going to discuss, even if you do or do not submit a proposal. So reviewers, as the name shows, and as I mentioned at the beginning of the conversation, are those folks who are going to read the proposals and recommend whether or not they should be accepted for presentation, right? They will create an evaluation based on a rubric for those proposals. And so that part of the volunteering work happens pretty much just during 1 month, which is mostly May, way before the conference. So if you volunteer for this role, it is expected that you will invest some time. It really depends on each of you and how comfortable you are in terms of reviewing proposals and how many proposals you volunteer to review. You can say, I have time to review 2, 3, 5, 10. And it takes, I would say, about 20 minutes or so for each proposal. And you just have to read those and provide the feedback in the ASHE portal that we use, which is called All Academic. And who can be a reviewer? Pretty much depending on the type of proposal, but pretty much anyone who is either a doctoral student or doctoral candidate, I should say, someone who has advanced for candidacy within a PhD or an EdD program, someone with a terminal degree, or someone who has a lot of experience as a practitioner, right? Someone whose expertise, regardless of any academic credentials, might make that person an expert in the topic and their feedback valuable. So you can just sign up the same way that you sign up when you submit a proposal. You will be asked whether or not you want to volunteer, and you can select any of this. So please, before April 22nd, volunteer to review a proposal if you have the time. And then during the actual conference, hopefully you all attend the conference. There's really nothing that you need to do as a volunteer in this capacity, right? Then the next volunteer role is to serve as chair of a session. And what that means is that every session, as we were discussing, it's going to be comprised, depending on the session, but 2 or 3 or 4 presentations of some sort, works in progress, papers, if it's a symposium, whatever. And it needs to be successful, the help of someone to coordinate, to facilitate that session. And that's the role of the chair. So that person typically would contact first, the speakers before the conference, just to make sure that everyone is, signed up for the conference, will be attending. That person will introduce, if there's a discussant, the presenters with the discussant, and just make sure that everyone is on the same line of thought in terms of the deadlines, submitting the papers, making sure that everyone has everything they need. And then the day of the conference, once the session happens, that person just makes sure that everyone is there in the room, introduces everyone, makes sure that the presentations are loaded on the computer, introduces the speakers, and facilitates the Q&A during the session. And again, the deadline for signing up to be a chair, it's the same one. It's April 22nd. When you sign up, when you submit a proposal. Or again, maybe you don't want to submit a proposal, but at least you can go into the portal and then volunteer as a chair. You will hear back in early July once the proposals are accepted, whether or not you will be required to serve as a chair. And then in August is when the actual program will be distributed, which means that we'll know exactly which session, which room, at what time you should be serving in that capacity. And it's really important for you to confirm whether or not you're actually, attending the conference and you don't have any conflicts. We'll obviously try to check that internally, that you're not presenting, for example, at the same time that you're chairing. But sometimes, things happen. So it's important that you touch base with the chair or co-chair of the session, of the section of the conference, which is ourselves and Dr. George Mwangi. And let us know if there's any conflicts. And then in early October, the other thing that we will require for you is just to, again, as I was saying, touch base between presenters and discussants if there's one. And during the ASHE conference, enjoy the conference, and then just during that session, making sure that everything is running smoothly. And then the last role that you can volunteer to serve is as a discussant. And for this role, what it requires is for someone to provide during the session oral feedback, and for the most part also written feedback, either before the session or after the session to the presenters with some constructive critiques, feedback, suggestions, some comments on how can these papers be then turned into publications, which is basically the hopes for everyone who's presenting, especially a scholarly or a research paper. And again, you'll sign up by April 22nd. You'll get notified in early July whether or not you will be a discussant of which session. And then in early August, we'll confirm exactly when that session is happening. And it's expected that you will receive the papers in early November, like 2 weeks before the conference, more or less. And so the commitment is for you to read all those papers and provide the feedback, prepare for your remarks. Typically, discussants take about like 10 minutes or so at the end of the session to provide their remarks to the audience and to the speakers there. And then you can submit, obviously, the papers with your comments on the margins if you want. And during the conference, basically that's your role, and also enjoy the conference. So those are the three broad types of volunteering opportunities that exist before and during the conference. So we invite you again to please sign up and be a volunteer. This is a great experience. If you haven't done so yet, I think it's a great opportunity that you can take advantage of. And you'll be exposed to reading very interesting work or listening to it during the session. And I think it's always something very, very good in terms of our own understanding of certain topics by reading what our colleagues are working on.
Thank you so much for a very detailed explanation. You want to add?
No, I guess kind of like with the last section, there's a question that it's specifically about this. Should I address it now or at the end?
You can quickly address. This is really related.
Cornelius asks how many papers are usually given to a discussant. So again, you volunteer to how many times you want to serve. So I think for the most part, people just sign up to be discussant, I think once or probably twice during the conference. I would say one per section. It's typically the usual. And then in each session, it depends, but you will get probably like 3 or I think up to 4 papers if I recall correctly. But I think the average is 3 papers that you will be discussing per session. And I wouldn't recommend signing to be a discussant in more than probably 2 sessions because it might be too much.
Great point. Sometimes the presenters sometimes do not show up to the session or they withdraw from the session. So sometimes as a discussant, maybe reviewing 2 papers will be happening as well. But usually it's 3 through 4 sometimes. And like Alicia just mentioned in the chat, if you want to be a volunteer, you have to be the ASHE member. So please sign up to be the ASHE member to be able to volunteer. All right, for next session, so the speakers will talk about the tips and strategies for submitting the proposals. So these are some bullet points that we collectively put together. But in addition to these items, are there any special tips or strategies from the co-chairs? Maybe Dr. Mitic, you want to start?
Yeah, I kind of hinted at this a little bit when I was talking about the different presentation types. Is I know, particularly if you're just kind of early on in your studies, that the literature is probably where you're probably the deepest into. So I think if you're doing a research paper, for example, the literature, don't spend too much on that because then you won't be able to give enough sort of space to sort of what we call like the meat of the paper. We're really interested in the findings and then that significance to the study of higher education. So I wouldn't worry too much about providing, 1,000 to 1,500 words of literature, because then you'll just kind of crowd the space out. And I think my biggest thing is that third point there about check the headings of the proposal. Make it this as easy as possible for the reviewers, because I don't think we have a screenshot of the reviewer pane, but it's literally those headings, and then it's a drop down 1 to 5. So if the reader can kind of see on the left hand side your paper with the headings, and then they see their sort of review sheet on the right hand side, it just makes it a lot easier to sort of align for the readers that are doing, because the readers are also probably reading up to, I think we try to cap around 12 proposals, so it's kind of a lot of proposals for people to read through. So try to make it as easy as possible.
Yes, that's a great tip. I will also probably add or highlight from the ones that are on the screen, the edit and review before submitting. I still remember how embarrassed I felt when for a conference I received feedback and the reviewer was like, this isn't like even, there were a couple of incomplete sentences. Like I submitted the proposal and I didn't like read it carefully when I submitted. Obviously I was rushing it, but I had like even like very obvious things. I'm not talking about like grammar or spelling, like just incomplete ideas, right? Where you don't even notice that. So taking a minute after finishing your proposal to just read it, making sure it's complete, it's coherent, it makes sense. Sharing that with someone in the chat, someone asked like whether or not you can get some like free review. Well, formally you can, like you cannot submit to ASHE and we'll give you some feedback on how you're doing on your proposal. But please do that informally with anyone that you feel comfortable, right? A classmate, any of your peers, a professor, a mentor, like even, a relative or any friend that might provide a second set of eyes to make sure that whatever you're writing, even if they don't know enough about the topic, it makes sense and what you're trying to explain. I think that will go a long way in making sure that your proposal is something that any reviewer will be able to follow and understand, and that it's strong and makes sense.
Thank you. And one last thing that I want to add on the tips and strategies. Oftentimes, international higher education topic, this is a small community than we think. So everybody knows everyone. So and then some researchers are already familiar with your research and your topic. So make sure that your proposal is a mask proposal. So you make all your names from the citations on your proposal all mask, so that your reviewer will not notice who you are. Well, and so that it makes the perfect mask proposal make it easier for the blind review. This is oftentimes some researchers make mistakes and then it goes back to to you, the original author, just to make it change. So just to prevent that delay, I highly recommend that you make sure that your proposal is fully mass. Okay, any other tips or strategies before we move on to the next section? Great. So this is the slide that we created just because we have some frequently asked questions from our previous years. So we're gonna try to answer to these questions, but if anyone wanna add any comments, please feel free to do that. So how CIHE pre-conference and international higher education section are different? Who wanna go start?
I can comment on that. It's the $1 million question every year. We get that question every single time, and even as someone who participates regularly at ASHE, I still struggle, like, should I send this to CIHE? Should I send this to the international higher education track of the general conference? And the reality is that the topics will be, similar. Like scholars that do this type of work will probably find a good home for their research and their papers in either of these venues. The most obvious difference is that CIHE is, as it names states, it's a pre-conference. So it's one full day before the conference, where we will discuss nothing but exclusively those proposals. We'll only see, like, there's nothing else happening within the CIHE community that will be overlapping. We have 4 pre-conferences, right? Different topics. But if we're talking about international and comparative higher education, during that Wednesday before the conference, it's only about CIHE. So that means that people will have to be there earlier, like one day before the conference starts, which means also probably some implications in terms of cost. But at the same time, it makes this a very nice, intimate environment where in a full day, you will be listening to presentations around this topic. You will be pretty much sharing the same activities. It's only for the most part, will only be like 2 rooms with 2 simultaneous presentations and some keynotes maybe in between, with only that community. So it's about 100 people, give or take, every year. That creates a really nice and friendly and kind of like tight environment as a pre-conference. And then the other sessions during the general conference will be spread out throughout the 3 days of the conference. So like if you want to like listen to like all of the presentations that are around international comparative higher education as part of that track, you will find sessions on Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. And you will see people more a little bit spread over the general conference. Again, pros and cons, right? That means that your session, if you're presenting in there, you might also have participants that will listen to your presentation that didn't sign up for the pre-conference. Like you have the possibility of anyone out of the 2,000 or so attendees that we expect for the general conference might listen to that presentation, as opposed to CIHE, which will be basically just the 100 and so people who sign up for the pre-conference. I guess that's the main difference that I notice.
Thank you so much for your input. I'm aware of the times.
Sorry. I think Dr. Ku, we're losing you.
Been, actively engaging with the questions, and then Alicia did a wonderful job on answering to the questions. So let me stop sharing, and then let's open up the floor for any further questions from the audience. This is more like relaxed, podium for everyone. So if you just have any additional questions to the speakers, please feel free to unmute yourself and then speak up.
Dr. Kerr, we have a question that was sent in for someone who is interested in submitting a research workshop on a study they've been conducting in international higher education. Is that an option for the conference? I can help answer because I believe, oh, Dr. Mitic, you look like you're processing.
Go ahead, because I thought the research workshops were only for the methods section of the conference.
Yes, that's correct. So you can submit a research workshop proposal, but when you're putting your proposal in, you need to choose the different section. And right now, for this year, the research workshops are only submittable to one section. And I can put that link in the chat. But yes, you can submit a research workshop. It just wouldn't be in the international higher education section.
So that will be reviewed by other sections reviewers.
And I would just say, a couple of us served on the ASHE strategic work group on global dimensions, and we had kind of talked about wanting, to have some sessions about how to do international research, like sort of a methodological perspective. So whoever put that question in, I definitely encourage you to do that, because it's something that we've been hoping to have as part of the conference.
Good point.
Another question about good entry points for either volunteering or submitting for first timers. I know you all spoke to posters and the pre-conference being an intimate session. Any other tips for first timers or good entry points? And this is from a graduate student, if that's relevant.
I will say that the works in progress are really great. Last year, I loved how those sessions turned out. Because it's, again, as an entry point, you might be working, if you're a graduate student, you might be still working on your dissertation. You have, a very good idea, a very close idea of what you're doing, but you might not have enough findings yet. So this is a great opportunity to kind of test your study overall, share what are your maybe preliminary findings. We just get feedback from the audience, from others who are doing similar work, from a discussant. So works in progress, I think, are a really great opportunity.
Another advice from my perspective for the first timer, I think that collaborate with somebody else who has some ASHE experiences will be also a great tip. Maybe you could approach your advisor and then get some help, or other fellow scholars who've been through this process before. That might be helpful. But it's not always happening for some scholars. So if you don't really have a collaborator or helper to get who can give you some advice or help, I think that read through the proposal content and requirements and try to see each heading of the proposal as your own grading rubric. Reviewers, we work on the grading rubric and then we evaluate the proposal by the rubric, and then that rubric is actually exactly the same of the headings of each proposal. So if you just don't forget to include any important points of each headings, and then make sure that you include every important contents under the heading, that will be a good starting point.
And then can you speak to volunteering is it recommended that a new person volunteer? And if so, a discussant might sound a little daunting, what might be a good entry point there?
Right, I forgot to mention that as well. So the first timer being the chair will be a great experience as a starting point. The chair is more like the logistic part of the session, while the discussant is more involved with the actual discussing and also putting some scholarly perspective as a discussant. And discussant will review the all the papers and then provide overall feedback across the papers and also provide more detail on each paper. So the discussant will be involved with more heavier job as a scholar. So I'm not going to say it's daunting, but this is something that you need to enjoy and be ready. So the first timer, I will recommend that you begin with the chair. Thank you, Dr. Castiello. Yes, so to be a discussant, you have to have a terminal degree in your field. And one thing that I want to add, as a reviewer, so each proposal will be reviewed by 3 reviewers, and 2 reviewers should be the terminal degree holder, but one of the reviewer can be the doctoral candidate. So that's how the ASHE proposal review works.
And I'll just add that the reviewers will undergo training on how to provide effective feedback. We've all had experiences, whether it's a conference or journal, where the reviewer has not given the most helpful feedback. So we're really trying to work with our reviewers to make sure that whether your proposal is accepted or not, that you have something you can take from it and then be able to, if it's not accepted, be able to turn it around and improve it for another conference submission, or coming back to ASHE next year. Because the goal is not to tear people down, it's to help you develop your work and be able to get it to a publication.
And I just wanted to offer one point of clarification because it's new this year. The discussants can actually be they don't have to have a terminal degree. They can have that substantive experience, and that in thinking about like 10 plus years in the field doing the practical application of the work. So that does apply to discussants as well, but that's a new change for this year. So definitely broadening the scope of folks who can be discussants. So if you have any questions about that, you can reach out to the ASHE staff or some of our volunteers, because that is a new change to the requirement for discussants.
Thank you for the clarification, Alicia. I just saw a question from Ying. So speakers, do you want to address anything about this IRB thing? As far as I know, well, I can go. As far as I know that the ASHE proposal, we need to have the study IRB approved, but I'm not knowing about the outside of the US case, because I know that depending on the different culture or different country, the IRB system is different. So I know that some non-US institution, they approve their study without IRB. And also depending on the type of study, like our ethnography, some IRB requirement is very different depending on the country and the situation. So yes, doctoral candidate can be a reviewer after you become a doctoral candidate. Well, Alicia, we might need your clarification, because if there's a new thing for this year. And anyone can speak for the Ying's question about IRB?
I would just say that I think that the key is that second part of the comment, that as part of your methods in the proposal, but most importantly, I think in the paper once you submit it, making sure that you're addressing how exactly you are protecting your human subjects in the study. That means many things, right? Here in the US, we're really used to saying like this study has been approved by an IRB board in a certain institution. If that's not the case, I would just be careful in explaining that the study was conducted with these steps to safeguard the participants of the study. And I mean, ASHE won't like ask you for a copy, a stamped copy of anything like that from an IRB perspective. But I think it's really important that we talk about our methods, specifically if when you're dealing with human subjects research in a way that it's crafted carefully, and that you compel that that message that you're taking care of your participants.
Very good point. I think that you need evidence as long as you bring the rationale, that it can be convincing enough for the reviewer. I am aware of the time, and it's 12 p.m. in my time in EST. So thank you everyone for taking the time to be here and support the community and to learn about the proposal submission process. I want to thank you to the speakers who take the time to be here and then speak for the community. And thank you, the ASHE office for helping us. All right. Have a wonderful rest of the day and the first day of April. Thank you so much.
Good luck, everyone. Hope to see you in
Alicia?
Minneapolis.
Yes, we hope to see all of you in Minneapolis. Take care.
Yay.